There is a letter that most Catholics have never read. It was written by Padre Pio to his spiritual director, Father Benedetto of San Marco in Lamis, in the autumn of 1922. It was not published during Padre Pio's lifetime. It was not included in the first editions of his collected correspondence. And when it was finally made available to researchers as part of the beatification process decades later, the section that draws the most attention is not about the stigmata, not about bilocation, not about any of the extraordinary phenomena that surrounded his life. The section that draws the most attention is 6 paragraphs long, and it describes something Padre Pio witnessed in a mystical vision that he said disturbed him more deeply than anything else he had seen in his years of spiritual combat. He saw the final second before damnation. He saw what every soul that is lost sees last. And he said, "I wept for 3 days after this vision, not because of what I saw in hell, but because of what I saw being offered in that last second, and refused." That is what this video is about. Not the horror of damnation, though what Padre Pio described is real, and I will not pretend otherwise. This is about that final second, what is in it, what God places there, and what it means for the way you live the time you still have before that second arrives. Stay with me from beginning to end, because everything I'm going to share has a direct application to your life tonight. And there is something Padre Pio said near the end of that letter that I believe may be the most hopeful thing a human being can hear. I am saving it for the close of this video, but you need to hear everything that comes before it to understand why it matters so much. I want to begin by telling you who this letter was written to and why that matters. Father Benedetto of San Marco in Lamis was Padre Pio's spiritual director for over a decade. He was a man of considerable theological education, not easily impressed, not prone to credulity. Padre Pio wrote to him frequently, and the letters that survive from that correspondence are among the most detailed and theologically rich documents we have from Padre Pio's interior life. The letter from autumn 1922 was written, Padre Pio explains, in its opening lines, because he had been wrestling with what he had seen for several weeks and had decided that the only way to find peace was to describe it fully to his director, even though the description he wrote would cost him considerably in the writing. He began with the circumstances. It was not a dream. He was clear about that. He had been at prayer in his cell when the vision came upon him without warning, the way his mystical experiences often did, as an imposition on consciousness rather than a development from within it. He found himself in the vision present to a death. He did not describe whose death. He wrote simply that God had brought him to witness the final moments of a soul, and that he understood, with the certainty that accompanied his visionary experiences, that what he was seeing was being shown to him not for curiosity's sake, but for the sake of those he would one day counsel. Let me tell you what he saw. The soul in the vision was not a criminal. That is the first thing Padre Pio emphasizes, and he returns to it more than once. He wrote, "This was not one of the great sinners that men speak of when they speak of hell. This was an ordinary soul, a baptized Catholic, a person who had received the sacraments in their life, a person who had, at various moments, been close to God. The distance between this soul and heaven at the moment of death was not a vast and obvious chasm. It was a single, persistent refusal. A specific thing that the soul had chosen over many years and many opportunities not to release." Padre Pio does not name the specific sin or situation, and scholars who have studied the letter believe this was deliberate because the particular content of the refusal matters less than the structure of what happened in the final second. The soul's specific wound is secondary. The mechanism is universal. Here is what Padre Pio saw in the final second. "In the moment of death," he wrote, "God did not come in judgment, God came in offering. There was a clarity that the soul had never experienced in life, a total, unobstructed vision of its own state and of what was being extended to it. Padre Pio used the Italian word specchio, mirror. God held up a perfect mirror, he wrote, and the soul saw itself completely. Not as it had told itself it was, not as it had appeared to others, but as it actually was, with the specific wound that had been the center of its spiritual life for so many years, the specific thing it had managed and avoided and rationalized and never fully brought to God. And in that mirror, the soul also saw what healing looked like, what was being offered, what one movement of the will, even now, even in this last second, would receive. Padre Pio wrote, "It was not a small offering, it was the full mercy of God, absolute, without condition, without demand for prior worthiness. The soul did not need to have been better in life to receive what was being offered in that second. It needed only to say yes. Hold on, because what happened next is the most important thing in this entire video. The soul said no." Padre Pio was very specific about this. He did not write that the soul was incapable of saying yes. He did not write that God withdrew the offer. He wrote that the soul, in full clarity with full understanding of what it was refusing, turned away from the mirror. And he described what the turning looked like. He said it was not defiance. It was not rage or hatred of God. It was something quieter and, in his view, more terrible. He described it as a kind of exhaustion. The soul was so formed in its refusal, so habituated to the turning away it had practiced across the years of its life, that when the final moment came, the turning away was simply what it knew how to do. The refusal was not a dramatic choice. It was the accumulated weight of all the smaller refusals that had gone before. He wrote, "I saw a soul choose what it had always chosen. That is why I wept. Not because God failed it, but because the soul, in the end, was most comfortable with what it had always been." I want you to sit with that for a moment, because this is the part of Padre Pio's vision that applies most directly to every one of us who is still alive, still making choices, still forming the habits of the interior life that will be with us at the end. The soul in the vision did not fail in the final second. The final second simply revealed what the soul had become across all the seconds that preceded it. Every time we choose, in a small and ordinary moment, to turn away from God's invitation, to manage rather than surrender, to hold on to what we have decided we are allowed to keep, we are practicing a habit. And habits, practiced long enough, become reflexes. And in the final second, Padre Pio saw, what comes is not a new choice, but the reflex of all the choices that came before. This is why he said he wept for 3 days, not about that soul alone, but about what the vision revealed about the ordinary Christian life, lived without urgency, treating each day's refusal as a small and reversible thing. Now I need to tell you something about Padre Pio's understanding of how this habituation works, because it is not abstract theology. It is something he observed directly over 50 years of hearing confessions in the ordinary people who came to him week after week and year after year. And what he observed gives the vision a weight that goes beyond the single soul he was shown. Padre Pio described to several of his spiritual children a pattern he had seen in the confessional that alarmed him more than the confessions of great and obvious sinners. He called it la vita amministrata, the administered life. The person who comes to confession regularly, but always with the same items year after year, without movement in the interior. The person whose prayer is consistent and whose external conduct is good, but who has, at the center of their spiritual life, something they have permanently set aside from the work of transformation, not a dramatic sin, not something they discuss openly, something they have quietly, firmly, and over long years decided is theirs to keep. He said, "The great sinner who weeps at my feet and confesses everything gives me hope. The administered life frightens me, because the great sinner knows they are sick. The person who administers their interior life has convinced themselves that they are well. And a person who believes they are well does not go looking for the medicine, they go on administering. And one day the final second comes, and the habit of administration, the habit of turning away from the complete thing while accepting the partial, is so deeply formed that it operates without any conscious decision at all. That is the mechanism the vision showed him. Not a dramatic decision at the end, a lifetime of small, quiet, barely noticed decisions accumulated into something that looks, in the final second, like a permanent posture, like who the soul simply is. And I want to ask you directly, because Padre Pio would ask directly, and I think you deserve the same honesty. Is there something in your interior life right now that you are administering? Not confessing in full, not surrendering completely, not bringing to the center of your prayer and leaving there without taking it back. Because if there is, you are practicing. And the final second will not give you a different reflex from the one you have been training. Hold on, because what Padre Pio discovered about how to break this pattern is not what most people expect. And it is the turn this recording has been moving toward from the beginning. Let me tell you something I have never shared in any other recording I have made, because what Padre Pio's vision showed me about my own life took years to fully see. When I was in my 40s, in the years before my husband David was diagnosed, I had a habit of prayer that I was quite satisfied with. I attended Mass, I said my rosary, I volunteered at the parish. But there was one area of my interior life that I kept in a separate room, so to speak, a resentment I had carried since my late 20s, involving something I had experienced at a time when I was at my most vulnerable. I had told myself for years that this particular wound was simply too deep to bring to God fully. I had partial conversations with him about it. I had mentioned it in confession in general terms, but the core of it, the specific thing, I had never placed directly before him and said, "This is yours. I'm releasing it entirely." When I finally read the description of this vision years after all of this, I recognized the mechanism immediately. Not because I was afraid of damnation, but because I saw that what I had been practicing in my comfortable and apparently devoted Catholic life was a very refined version of the turning away. I was present to God everywhere, except in the one room where it actually cost something. Padre Pio would not have been surprised by my story. He had heard variations of it in the confessional for 50 years, the devout person who has kept one room locked, the faithful Catholic whose life of prayer is genuine and real, but organized, quite carefully, around a specific absence. He said once to a woman who came to him after 30 years of what she described as a consistent and devoted spiritual life, "Your soul is like a house with every room lit and beautifully kept, except one room. And that one dark room drains the light from the others. Slowly, so slowly you do not notice, until one day you realize the whole house is dimmer than it used to be, and you do not understand why, because you have been keeping everything else so well." That was me. That may be you. And if it is, what Padre Pio offers is not condemnation. It is a door. Now I want to tell you what Padre Pio saw in the final second from a different angle, because there is an element of the vision that I have not yet described, and it is the element that shifted everything for me when I first read it. He wrote that in the final second, along with the mirror and the offering, there was something else present. He said he saw, surrounding the dying soul, what he could only describe as presences. Not demons, not angels in the conventional sense. He said they were the prayers that had been prayed for that soul across its lifetime, the rosaries offered by a mother, the quiet intentions of a priest who had known the person in childhood. The small moments of intercession from people who had loved the soul and prayed for its good without knowing why, moved by some quiet impulse they could not explain. He wrote, "They were all there. Every prayer ever offered for that soul was present in that final second. None of them had been lost. None of them had failed to arrive." And then he wrote the sentence that I have returned to more times than any other sentence in all of his writings. He said, "I understood then that the prayers of the living for the dead and for the dying are not wasted, even when they seem unanswered for years. They gather, they wait, they are all present at the moment they are most needed." He also said, "I understood then that the prayers of the living for the living matter beyond what can be calculated." When you pray for someone who does not yet know they need it, when you pray for souls who seem far from God, those prayers are not whispered into absence. They travel ahead. They wait in the final second for the one who was prayed for. Hold on, because this changes everything about how you understand the rosary you pray for someone who is not listening right now, the Mass you attend for someone who has left the church, the novena you make for a family member who seems too far gone to reach. None of it is wasted. Every prayer gathers. Every prayer is present in the final second. And sometimes, Padre Pio wrote, it is precisely the weight of accumulated prayer that tips the balance in that last moment. The soul that has been prayed for by many over many years arrives at the final second, surrounded by what has been given for it. And the offering God makes in that second is, in some mysterious way, Padre Pio did not claim to fully understand, shaped by and carried by the love that preceded it. This is what he saw in the vision. This is what made him weep, not only with grief for what was refused, but with a different kind of emotion that he could only describe as awe. The mercy of God in the final second was extravagant, and the prayers of ordinary people, people who had no knowledge that they were contributing to this moment, were woven into that extravagance. I want to stay with this for one moment longer, because it is easily heard and easily passed by, and I do not want you to pass by it. Padre Pio said that the soul in the vision, the one that refused, was surrounded by prayers. He saw them clearly. Every rosary offered for that soul, gathered there. Every Mass attended for its intention, gathered there. And the soul, in the clarity of the final second, could see them. It could see what had been given for it. It could see the love that had traveled ahead and waited, and it still refused. Padre Pio wrote that this was the detail that broke him most completely, not the suffering of hell, not the absence of God, but the fact that the soul could see, in full clarity, the love that had been offered for it across a lifetime, could see the prayers of those who had knelt for it in the dark, and in the face of all of that, turned away. Because the habit of turning away was, by that point, more fundamental to the soul than anything else, more fundamental than the love that surrounded it, more fundamental than the mercy that was extended to it. The soul turned from what it had always turned from, and this time there was no more time to practice a different turning. This is why Padre Pio said, again and again, to the people who came to him, "The time you have now is not neutral. Every day is practice, the direction of every small choice, in the interior life, in the managed rooms, in the partial confessions, in the habits of prayer kept comfortable by what they do not include. Every choice is a repetition, and repetition builds the soul you will be in the final second." Now I need to tell you about the practical implication of all this, the part of the vision that Padre Pio translated directly into pastoral instruction for the people who came to him in San Giovanni Rotondo. Because he did not keep this vision for himself. After the 3 days of weeping, and after he had written to Father Benedetto and received a response, he began to speak about what he had learned from it in his confessional ministry. Not the full account, but the essential conclusion. The essential conclusion was this: there are two things that matter supremely for what happens in the final second. The first is the habits of the interior life that you are forming right now, today, in ordinary time, in the unremarkable days when nothing is forcing a decision. The second is the prayers that are being prayed for you and that you are praying for others. For the first, Padre Pio became urgent in his spiritual direction about one particular practice. He said, repeatedly and insistently to the men and women who made confession with him, identify the one thing you are managing, not your most dramatic sin, not the area of your life that you consider the greatest failure, the thing you are managing, the specific wound or habit or choice that you have been keeping in a separate room, handled but never truly surrendered, and bring it fully to God before the next confession, not as a category, not in general terms, by name. He said, the soul that arrives at the final second with nothing managed, nothing withheld, nothing kept in a room that God has not entered, arrives in a very different condition from the soul that has kept one room locked for 20 years. The difference may not be visible to anyone who knows you. It is entirely visible to God. And it is the difference that determines what the final second looks like from the inside. For the second, for the prayers, Padre Pio gave instruction that surprised many of the people who received it. He told them to pray specifically for the dying, not only for the people they knew who were dying, but for the unknown dying. For the souls somewhere in the world who were in their final hours and who had few or no people praying for them. He told them to offer 1 decade of the rosary each day for the unknown dying, for the souls whose final second was approaching without the weight of many prayers surrounding them. He said, you do not know their names. You do not need to. God knows their names. And what you offer for them does not disperse into nothing because you do not know them. It travels, it gathers with whatever else is there, and it arrives in the final second for the soul God has chosen to receive it. This is why the Rosary is not merely a devotional comfort. In the understanding of Padre Pio, who had seen what the prayers that gather around a dying soul look like from the other side, the Rosary prayed with intention for the dying is a form of spiritual warfare. It is presence offered to someone who may be alone in their final second. It is love traveling ahead to wait. I've kept this practice for 11 years, 1 decade every day, for the unknown dying. I cannot tell you what it has done for anyone else. I can tell you what it has done for my own prayer life. Something in the habitual offering of intercession for someone I will never meet has gradually eroded the self-referential quality that prayer can accumulate when it is only ever directed at the things and people in your own immediate circle. It has made the prayer larger than myself, and that, I think, is exactly what Padre Pio intended. And I want you to consider something that Padre Pio believed with absolute conviction. The unknown dying person for whom you pray a decade of the Rosary tonight does not know your name, but you are present in their final second. Your prayer is there, and the love you send forward into a death you will never know about is recorded with a precision that neither you nor I can imagine by the God who told us that not a sparrow falls without his knowledge. Let that be large enough to motivate the practice. Let it be large enough to make the Rosary feel like what Padre Pio always said it was, the weapon, the most underestimated weapon in the hands of an ordinary Catholic, not a comfort device, a weapon, and the battlefield it operates on is the final second of every soul that is dying tonight while you read these words. But I have not yet told you the most important part of the letter, the part that Padre Pio wrote at the end, after all the description of the vision, after the theological reflection he offered to Father Benedetto, the final paragraph, the part I promised at the beginning of this video. He wrote, I have described to you what I saw, and I know that the soul I was shown is real, and that what it refused is real, and that the grief of that refusal is real. But I want you to know also what I came to understand in the 3 days after the vision, in the weeping, in the prayer that accompanied the grief. I understood that God showed me this not to terrify. God does not show his servants things in order to terrify them. He shows them things in order to change them, and through them to change others. And what I understood is this: the same God who was present in that final second with the full extravagance of his mercy is present right now in ordinary time, in the unheroic middle of a Tuesday afternoon or a Thursday evening, waiting for the same movement of the will that he offered in the final second. He does not reserve the full offering for the final moment. The full offering is here now, in the ordinary confession, in the quiet surrender of the managed thing, in the one room you have not yet let him enter. The final second is not the only second, it is the last. But every second before it carries the same offering. The same mirror is available now. The same mercy is present now, and the soul that practices receiving it now, in small and ordinary moments, is the soul that will know what to do with it when the last moment comes. Padre Pio ended the letter with 3 Latin words that Father Benedetto would have understood immediately from the Psalms: Nunc et semper, now and always. The mercy is present now and always. The invitation is now and always. And the soul that learns, gradually and imperfectly and with many failures along the way, to say yes to it now and always, will find at the final second that the yes comes more naturally than it ever expected, because it has been practicing. That is the hope, not that we will somehow be ready when the final second arrives, but that the same God who is there in the final second is here now, and that here and now we still have time to practice. Remember the letter, remember the 3 Latin words at the end: Nunc et semper, now and always. Padre Pio chose those words deliberately for Father Benedetto, knowing that his director would feel their full weight in the context of everything that had come before them in the letter, now and always, not in the final second only, not when you have adequately prepared yourself, now, in the moment you are in, with the soul you have developed through the choices you have made up to this point. The mercy meets you there, exactly there, not in a better version of yourself that you imagine you will eventually become, in the self you actually are right now. That is what the vision showed Padre Pio. The offering in the final second was not made to a completed soul. It was made to the soul that showed up. And the same offering is made every day in confession, every day in prayer, every time the managed room is approached and the hand reaches for the key. The offering does not wait for readiness. It only waits for the reaching. Let me tell you something most people do not realize about this hope. It is not conditional on the quality of the practice. Padre Pio was very clear about this when he described the vision to those he trusted with it. The soul that is still learning, still failing, still finding that the yes comes imperfectly and not always immediately, is not in the same position as the soul that has given up trying. There is an enormous difference in the spiritual life between the person who is moving in the direction of surrender, however slowly and however imperfectly, and the person who has made their peace with the managed life and stopped moving at all. Padre Pio said, God does not require perfection in the practice. He requires direction. A soul moving toward him, even slowly, even stumbling, even with the managed room still not fully opened, is a soul in a different spiritual condition from one that has ceased to move. And the final second is more merciful toward the stumbling pilgrim than it is toward the soul that sat down and decided the journey was not necessary. This is the pastoral Padre Pio, not the severe confessor who refused absolution, though he was that too when the situation required it. The Padre Pio who wrote to Father Benedetto for 3 days after weeping, because what the vision showed him was not primarily a warning about hell. It was primarily a revelation about mercy, about how close and how extravagant and how perpetually available that mercy is. and about how the greatest tragedy is not the soul that sins greatly and repents greatly, but the soul that lives carefully and surrenders nothing and arrives at the final second, finding that its practiced no is stronger than the offered yes. That soul breaks his heart, and your soul, Padre Pio believed, is one that he is interceding for, right now, from where he is, with the certainty of a man who has seen the final second and understands exactly what is at stake. I want to give you one practical instruction before I close. Not a list of things to do, one thing. The thing Padre Pio considered most urgent for the ordinary Catholic living an ordinary life. Take 5 minutes today, not tomorrow, today, and identify the managed room, the one specific area of your interior life that you have kept in a category called handled but not surrendered. It does not need to be the greatest sin of your life. It needs to be honest. Name it internally, to yourself and to God. And then pray this in whatever words are natural to you. Lord, I have been keeping this room managed instead of surrendered. I give you the key now, not because I feel ready, not because it is comfortable, but because I do not want to practice the turning away anymore. Come into this room. Whatever is in it belongs to you. That is enough. You do not need to resolve the wound today. You do not need to feel the freedom immediately. You need to make the first movement, the movement that interrupts the habit of the managed life and begins the habit of the surrendered one. And Padre Pio's entire priestly life was testimony to what God does with that first movement, however small, however imperfect. There is one more thing I want to tell you before the practical instruction, and it comes directly from what Padre Pio told a young seminarian named Brother Giacinto, who asked him, some years after the letter to Father Benedetto, whether the vision had changed his own practice in any way. Padre Pio looked at him for a long moment and said, "It made me more patient with the people who come to me, because I saw that the soul I was shown was not worse than the rest of us. It was only more practiced in the small turning away, more confirmed in the habit of administration. And I understood then that every person who sits in the confessional with me is not standing at the edge of some dramatic divide between the saved and the lost. They are in the middle of a practice, and what I can offer them is not judgment. It is a better practice, a direction, a key for the room. That is all the confessional is, a place to receive the key and begin practicing the opening. Whether they leave and open the room or leave and manage it again, I cannot control, but I can give the key every time they come. And I can pray that the weight of the giving accumulates toward the final second, so that in that last moment the key is more familiar in their hand than the turning away. Begin the decade of the Rosary tonight for the unknown dying, just 1 decade. Offer it simply, with the intention that it travel to whoever in the world is in their final hours without enough prayer surrounding them. You do not need to feel the weight of it. You need to do it. And doing it night after night will over time change not only your prayer, but your understanding of what the Rosary is and what you are capable of offering with it. As long as you are alive, the final second has not come. Every second you still have is a second in which the same offering that God placed before that soul in its last moment is being placed before you. The mercy is extravagant. The prayers of those who love you are gathering, and the God who was present at the beginning of your life is present at the end of every day, waiting for the one thing that opens everything else. It is not too late. While there is breath, it is never too late. If this reached you today, it is not by accident. Padre Pio spent his entire priestly life making sure that these truths traveled from San Giovanni Rotondo to wherever they were needed. If this recording found you, consider what that means. The super thanks button below is not simply support for a channel. It is your way of saying, I want these truths to keep traveling, to keep reaching the souls who are in their ordinary days, not knowing how close the final second is for the people around them. Not knowing that what they do right now, in the managed rooms of their lives, is the most important spiritual work available to them. Every person who supports this work makes it possible to keep bringing the full teaching of Padre Pio, not the comfortable parts only, but the parts that change us, to the people who need it. You are not just a viewer. You are part of the reason this truth continues to travel. Write mercy in the comments if something in this recording found you today. Write it simply, without explanation, and let that single word be the first small movement in the direction Padre Pio is pointing you. And if you know someone who is carrying something managed, something kept in a room that God has not yet been invited into, share this with them before tonight, not to frighten them. Padre Pio did not use fear as a tool. He used truth. And the truth, as he wrote in the last line of that letter, is this: the offering is real, the mercy is extravagant, and the time that remains is a gift for exactly this purpose. Use the time. The final second is not the only second, but it is coming. And everything you do between now and then is either practice for the yes or practice for the no. Padre Pio believed, with the certainty of a man who had seen the invisible world clearly, that you are watching this because you are ready to practice the yes. So am I.